Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to electric cooking to building codes and beyond. On this episode, we'll chat with Mike Specian, Utilities Manager at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. How can energy efficiency help address soaring load growth? What role do demand-side measures play in lowering energy bills? Stay tuned to find out. Here's your host, Atlas Public Policy Analyst, Stephen Naimoli.
Welcome to the 25th episode of Buildings Hub Live. Today we're going to talk about energy efficiency and its role in countering soaring load growth and therefore energy bills for folks. Before we get started, I want to give a quick note on Atlas Buildings Hub. It is our one-stop shop building electrification and decarbonization data platform. We've got state policy tracking. We've got building characteristics information, demographics, all kinds of things that you might be interested in. Please check it out at atlasbuildingshub.com. We'd love to have you join our community. Now, for today's episode, I would love to introduce our special guest. Here with us is Mike Specian. He's Utilities Manager at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And Mike, thanks so much for being here with us.
Oh, happy to be here. Great conversation to be having, especially right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's jump into it. Just to get us started, can you talk us through a little bit about your role and your organization? Absolutely.
So I am the Senior Research Manager for the State and Utility Program at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. ACEEE is a national nonprofit. Through research and engagement with decision makers, we work hard to figure out the value of energy efficiency and making sure that it is maximized through policies and programs.
Great. So the genesis really for this conversation today is you and a colleague put out a report recently that was looking at how this significant load growth from large load customers like data centers, industry, manufacturing, like very significant demand centers for electricity. And you looked at the role that energy efficiency can play and demand and load flexibility in these demand side measures. Can you talk us through just like the high level kind of findings of your report?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've identified what the issue is. And when we talk about load growth, it's important to realize that the United States has had largely flat demand for the last 20 years. So what we're experiencing right now with load going up is unfamiliar territory for a lot of utilities and regulators. And a lot of folks are scrambling to figure out, how do we deal with it? Data centers are taking up a lot of the attention, and rightfully so, because they are going to be the overwhelming driver of peak load or of new load over the next 5 years. But as you mentioned, there's going to be new loads coming online due to the electrification of buildings, through the forms of heat pumps, through transportation in the forms of electric vehicles, and industry as well. And so we wanted to answer 4 fundamental questions. The first is, how much efficiency and flexibility potential is out there? Like, is there enough to actually make a difference? If so, what does it cost? Can we get it quickly? And how do we do so in a way that actually protects ratepayers?
So one thing that I'm curious about is, let's say that we're able to make like a significant effort here in countering this load growth and doing a lot of energy efficiency, a lot of load flexibility, a lot of things here. What kind of impact would that have on the average person's utility bills?
A significant amount, actually. So one of the things that's helpful to understand about electricity bills is that, when you get them, there's a rate on it, how much you pay per kilowatt hour of electricity. Usually it's around 13 cents, 15 cents. If you're in California, it might be 30 cents or more. And that electricity bill is split up into various components. You're paying for generation of power, you're paying for power plants, you're paying for the transmission lines that bring the power from the generators to your neighborhoods, and then you're paying for the distribution system, which are the power lines outside your house. And when energy efficiency and flexibility are utilized, we need less power, we need fewer power plants to provide that power, and depending on where the load growth is happening, we may need less distribution upgrades. For example, if there's a neighborhood that's plugging in a lot of EVs or adding a lot of heat pumps, that can overwhelm a distribution system feeder. If you can target efficiency and flexibility to those particular areas, you can lower that demand and avoid those infrastructure expenses. And it's worth noting that the expense of the distribution system is actually one of the largest costs that's likely to be induced by load growth, particularly as we approach mid-century. So of the four major drivers of costs on your electricity bills, energy efficiency and flexibility can substantially address three of the four. The amount that you're going to save is actually going to depend on your particular region, and the costs and rates become kind of complicated, but the point is there's a lot of potential to reduce those costs through demand-side measures.
If you're doing that, is there a role then for, essentially what role does building new generation and rate basing that play in this kind of complex web? I mean, are you looking to avoid utilities building new generation by kind of calling on energy efficiency?
Yes. To be clear, though, when we've looked at the potential for energy efficiency and flexibility, we find that there's about an opportunity to reduce energy use in the United States by about 8%, and the ability to reduce demand by about 130 to 270 gigawatts if you combine efficiency and flexibility together. That is still less than the amount of load growth that we are forecasting through mid-century. So while demand-side measures can take a significant chunk out of the load growth problem, it can't address all of it, which means there's going to need to be a complementary solution that combines both demand-side measures and supply. So we're still going to need solar and wind and batteries and perhaps other generation resources on top of it. We can't get there all by ourselves with DSM. The thing that we want to keep in mind, though, is in order to develop a low-cost power system that keeps rates low for customers and bills low for customers, we want to be choosing the lowest cost resources that are able to provide power safely and reliably. And right now, the cost of energy efficiency per megawatt hour is about $20.70. By comparison, gas plants, which are often being used as the kind of default solution to load growth, price in between about $45 and $108 per megawatt hour, and that doesn't even include the additional distribution system expenses. So yes, we will need generation, but in principle, we should be taking the low-hanging, cost-effective fruit first and just, stack up from there.
That makes sense. I mean, it really feels like it fits with like all of the stuff that I've been hearing about my whole career, and even when I first started learning about, getting into the energy sector and like energy efficiency, particularly in electricity, energy efficiency is always like the first thing the first response, the first asset, because it's typically a lot cheaper than building new generation.
Yep.
But
you lose weight before you put on the suit, before you purchase the suit, right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But I am curious, though, when you are building new generation, and you mentioned gas plants or gas generation is often a kind of the solution that utilities are turning to for particularly data centers.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a lot of talk, and you talk about this in your report a little bit as well, about, well, what if the data centers just bring their own energy? My kind of favorite new acronym is Beyonce, bring your own clean energy. I think that's delightful. So what if the data centers just do that? I mean, does that help? Does that help kind of mitigate the problem? Does that take away the need to kind of do some of this energy efficiency, load flexibility, all that kind of stuff?
Well, it doesn't take away the need, but it is certainly helpful. And it's something that I personally would advocate for. There's a very real risk that if data centers are built and new power generation is built to serve them, that there could be a disconnect between those timescales. So typically when you're building a power plant, it's on a decadal timescale that it's going to be there. Data centers have GPUs, processing units, that really need to be upgraded every 5 years. And there's a very real risk that data centers that are projected to join a utility service territory won't actually materialize. It's so common a phenomenon that it's referred to as phantom loads. Like there's actually a term for it. Or it's possible that the data center could leave early. And if that's the case, the infrastructure that was built for them still needs to be paid for. And those additional costs get put onto ratepayers. It becomes socialized over the rate base, and that would increase costs for everybody else. So the policy of what we might call cost causation is actually a very good one. It doesn't, however, negate the need for demand-side measures, because even if data centers are bringing their own capacity to meet their energy needs, they're still going to want to do so in the lowest cost way possible, and efficiency and flexibility still provides that option. The challenge today is that it's not as easy for these companies to go out and procure demand-side resources as it is to do voluntary procurement of, say, renewable energy, which has been an established practice really since the Greenhouse Gas Protocol was updated in around 2015. So we do need to find ways to open up those channels, but DSM certainly has its benefits. Oh, and one other thing, of course, that's very important is if you're building more gas plants, regardless of who's paying for it, that's more carbon emissions in the air. That keeps us from meeting our carbon goals.
Certainly, yeah. So if we do need to make those sorts of changes to make it easier for these these companies to procure DSM, how do we do that, and who needs to be involved? Is that an ISO, like RTO sort of situation? Is it a FERC question? Is it utilities? I mean, where does that sort of come in, and who is involved?
There's a role for a lot of different actors, I would say. But one of the things that I think is really important is let's leverage what we have. So utilities have been running energy efficiency programs for decades. They know how to put them together. They understand measures. They understand how to do so cost effectively, and they have established relationships with their customers. If large load customers were to pay into utility efficiency programs, they could not only benefit customers in the region, not only could they lower power costs in that region, but they could do so without adding additional burden on themselves to administer the program. They could also go out and voluntarily procure demand-side resources if there were third-party providers that were able to offer those services. We often refer to this as community-based power. Some people refer to them as virtual power plants. But the idea is that there are all sorts of devices in our buildings, like HVAC systems and water heaters and EV chargers, that we can change the timing on which they operate, and in doing so provide demand flexibility. If you aggregate that together over a large number of buildings, now you've created a pretty appreciable resource that can be used to lower utility stress and lower stress on the grid. There are other ways to do it as well. In Minnesota, they passed a law where large data centers have to pay into a fund, $2 to $5 million per year, and that fund goes to pay for low-income weatherization, helping keep buildings more efficient through tighter building envelopes. So there's a lot of ways to go about this, but all sorts of people, including the data centers themselves, the utilities who could run the programs, the regulators who would approve them, and then the legislators who can kind of set the rules for the road, all of them have a role to play in helping build this kind of new ecosystem that we're going to need to deal with load growth.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for like the large load customers to help pay into basically to helping the broader system, and it sounds kind of like a renewable energy credit sort of situation where they're paying for these projects that are not necessarily paying to have projects at their or add resources on their facilities, but rather some things that will kind of help the broader system. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no problem with data centers becoming more efficient inside their walls. But if you engage in efficiency and flexibility within the same grid service territory that's, satisfying the energy needs of a data center, you can have the same effect. And truth be told, there's more efficiency and flexibility potential outside the walls of a data center than inside. So it's a great option to reservoir. I would call it a strategic reservoir, but there's really no positive reason or strategy behind not tapping it and utilizing it as much as possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's an interesting and sort of creative way to both sort of draw on the history of energy efficiency and demand response and all these programs, while also kind of learning from, lessons learned from like renewable energy credit markets and community power, community solar, and all of these kinds of things, sort of pulling everything together and making everything, kind of figuring out how to apply all these lessons in different ways in these different sectors.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's true that, renewable energy credits have been, wonderful. They're not perfect, but they've been wonderful in helping to expand the energy efficiency resource. To date, we have not had something comparable at scale for demand side resources, but there are emerging ideas like demand side environmental attribute credits, or EACs. We are working right now to build the market for that and to build trust in that resource. I think we will continue to do so, but the model that renewable energy has provided is a good one, and we should take those lessons and apply them.
I'm also curious, as you said, like it's helpful to get these large load customers to pay into these markets where we can help fund, energy efficiency, weatherization, electrification, all these different things that can help the grid and can help other people, lower their costs, things like that. But it also, and that's great, and it's great to have more funding because that's always an issue. But I've also, seen a lot over the years that we've had energy efficiency programs, we've had demand response programs, we've had weatherization. Like, these are things that have been around for a long time, and even if there's funding, they're not always necessarily getting used. Are there things like attributes about some of these programs that we could change to be able to kind of make consumers be more interested, or maybe it's not the consumer side, maybe it's, the restrictions are too onerous or things like that. I mean, are there changes that we need to make to some of these programs that they would fund that would then help ensure that those benefits get distributed broadly?
There are always ways to make demand side management programs work better, but I wouldn't put all of the blame or responsibility on the programs themselves. I think you alluded to it in your question. There's a lot of cases in which demand side programs are just not financially supported to the same extent that generation and infrastructure is supported. So there's a definite lack of financial support here. There are things that we can do to alleviate that. The first thing is that state legislators can just pass requirements that say how much minimum energy savings utilities have to achieve. Like, these are known as energy efficiency resource standards, and states that have them generate by far the majority of energy savings in the United States. So higher targets will work. You also just need to make sure that there's adequate financial support. So a lot of times when these targets are developed, a number will just be thrown out, and they'll say we have to save, 0.75% of retail sales through energy efficiency. And there may or may not be rhyme or reason to that number. But if you give adequate financial support for these programs, they can scale up pretty quickly. In fact, we took a look recently at some of the fastest growing utility programs over the last 10 years, and they've grown at 43% year over year. And when we ask the folks who are responsible for implementing these programs, what's holding you back? And if that bottleneck were eliminated, how quickly could you move? And the answer, we just need more money. You put more financial resources behind it, and we could double these programs year over year. So there is the potential there. There is the speed there. We just have to put the policy support behind getting it. And then the programs themselves have to make sure that they're providing the right incentives, they're marketing them correctly, and that they are educating their customers about the options that they've made available, the incentives that are available, and to do so before it comes time for them to replace equipment at the end of their lives.
It's funny how often the issue is just, well, we need more money, and that's not a a negative statement. I just, it's just true. Like oftentimes there's not enough funding available for these programs that need that are trying to serve people.
Money solves a lot of problems, but it's important to realize this is not just money that isn't giving you an investment. Because the truth is, if you're not lowering demand, if you're not lowering energy usage through demand side measures, you're going to have to pay an alternative. And that is, you're going to have to pay for generation, and you're going to have to pay for more power plants. So when we talk about putting more money into energy efficiency, what we're really saying is transfer the money that you otherwise would have spent on supply side resources and spend it on more cost effective demand side resources. It's just a reorganization of the investment you already have to make. But the benefit is when you put it into demand side measures, you get a little bit of money back, and that allows you to either return that money to ratepayers or do other positive things to increase the reliability, safety, and affordability of the energy system.
Hear, hear. Related to that, so it would be great and helpful and useful if utilities are able to get more money for these programs so that they can kind of distribute them more broadly, the benefits more broadly. But right now, in a lot of states, we're seeing kind of the opposite trend. We just put out a digest. My colleague Jacqueline wrote a newsletter essentially yesterday, saying or kind of noting how several states are either talking about or actually moving forward with cutting energy efficiency spending to essentially cut the line items on customers' bills that say, this is your money going here. Right. We've seen Massachusetts is talking about it, Rhode Island. It happened just recently in Arizona, cutting a proposed budget from APS, their utility there. So we're seeing a lot of this, whereas at the same time, energy efficiency advocates are saying, well, but you're not addressing affordability. You are actually, it's a short-term gain for a long-term loss. What is driving the disconnect there?
Now, I think it has to do with, first of all, you've identified that there is a problem. There's an energy affordability crisis in the United States. I've worked in states where utilities have said our number one obligation is to make sure that our utility rates do not go up. We've seen in New Jersey, this has become a major political issue. So the driver is real, and keeping costs low is really important. But when you look at an electricity bill, what you will often see is energy efficiency programs are pulled out as a separate adder or a rider. This is something that's on your bill as a public benefits charge, whereas all the other costs of the energy system are embedded in rates, right? They're not easily disaggregated. So if you look at your bill, you can say, oh, well, if we just cut this line item out of it, then we'll be good. Except what your bill doesn't tell you is what are the costs, the additional costs that you will bear from eliminating that line item. And either for political expediency or because we haven't done a good enough job of educating decision makers as to the options that they have available, there still kind of remains a bit of a disconnect between the ability for DSM to lower bills and the need, or the desire rather, for people to want to cut energy efficiency programs.
Yeah, so it's hard to know, like, in terms of that the line items being presented on your bill. We all want transparency, and it makes sense. I can totally understand why someone would look at it and say, oh, well, where are there things that we can cut to lower bills, because it's hard, right? As you've noted, like, rates are an incredibly complicated, and then going from rates to then determining everything that's on your bill is incredibly complicated. And so these, particularly I'm thinking about these governors who've been voted in promising to lower energy bills. Like, they've got a lot of work cut out for them. But it seems like countering that desire, I suppose, to just sort of cut what we see on the bill is difficult. We can't just, I would imagine we can't just sort of hide the different, where your money's going, because that raises a lot of transparency issues. Are there any other kind of creative solutions that you've heard or that you've come up with in your work?
Well, we don't address this specifically in our Faster and Cheaper report, which talks about a lot of the recommendations and lays out these arguments, as well as providing tons of examples and pieces of legislation that we think would all be helpful to at very least consider when you're trying to address this problem. But if we go and take an even higher view, one of the fundamental difficulties with energy efficiency has to do with the ways that utilities make money. So under what's known as the conventional cost of service model, whenever utilities build infrastructure, so new power plants or power lines or substations, what would be considered capital expenses, they're allowed to earn a rate of return on those investments, typically around 10%. And for decades, that's made sense, right? Like, you want to create an incentive for utilities to build more infrastructure so that our power needs can be met. But when efficiency started becoming a real resource that could be acquired within buildings, it was really treated and has mostly been treated as an operational expense. So it's something where the utilities may be able to recover the costs that they spend, but they don't profit off of it. And if you don't provide profit-driven, investor-owned utilities the ability to profit off of an activity, they have a responsibility to do the things that are going to make them money. So it's very natural that utilities have, gone the direction of preferring generation over demand side measures. It makes total sense. So our perspective is to either allow energy efficiency and demand flexibility investments to qualify as capital expenses so they can earn a rate of return on them, or otherwise require or incentivize these resources to be acquired, which can help overcome this business model that in a lot of cases I think has become outdated and doesn't meet the needs of what we might call a performance-based regulation, where we set goals that deal with affordability, social benefits, greenhouse gas reductions, all of the things that a state and a society values. With that, you put all that in there, and I think you've got a much better way of running and managing an electricity system.
There's a lot to chew on there.
Not an easy issue, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned, specifically the profit-driven, investor-owned utilities. Like it's a way to kind of target them and sort of realign their incentives. Would it work differently for a muni or a co-op or like public power agencies that maybe don't have exactly the same incentives?
Yeah, the motivations are different, right? When you have cooperatives that are owned by their members and municipal utilities who are serving their jurisdictions, like CPS does in San Antonio and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power does in the LA region, they are not required to basically run a profit. They're doing so for their members and for their community. So the same pressures to maximize profit don't exist with them nearly as much as they do for the large investor-owned utilities. But it's worth bearing in mind that if you look at the largest utilities in the country, I think if you look at maybe the top 50, I want to say maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 of them fall into the municipal category. There's no co-ops, which largely serve rural areas that are in the largest utilities. So if we want to address the bulk of the issue, we have to address investor-owned utilities. And until we address the cost of service model, it's going to remain challenging. Can be overcome, but it is a big reason why the thing that makes sense and the thing that costs less and the thing that benefits ratepayers isn't always the thing that we do.
Right. Yeah. No, I ask only because I'm curious whether, are there like smaller avenues where we can get, smaller wins with like munis or co-ops or things like that, and then sort of build the momentum and build up from there was sort of my curiosity there.
Yeah, the other thing to bear in mind though is if you're a smaller utility, it is a bit harder to run a kind of a large scale and successful energy efficiency program. Like sometimes these utilities serve very small numbers of customers, and there are fixed costs for running and administering a program. So it is a bit easier to do so when you do so at scale. In addition to utilities running their own programs, there are models where the states can administer the programs. There's Wisconsin has this. There's Efficiency Vermont in Vermont, and the DCSCU, the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, right here in Washington, D.C. So there are other ways to create models or sort of aggregated programs that can serve multiple smaller utilities at once. But I do think that because the bulk of the savings can typically come from the investor-owned utilities, a lot of our attention should probably be spent there. Also because they tend to have more mature programs, and these programs can run well. We just have to make sure that they are properly incentivized and funded to do so.
That feels like the classic problem, isn't it? But that also feels like a really great note to end on. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. It was really interesting reading your report and talking to you about all these issues. So, and I'm sure our audience will agree.
Yeah, and once again, if this is an issue that interests you or the folks that you work with, you can download the report faster and cheaper at ACEEE, that's ACEEE.org. It's a great reference, lots that's in there, and Steve and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, thanks, Mike. And thanks to our audience for joining. I want to make just a note about Buildings Hub Live. This will be our last episode of Buildings Hub Live as is. We will continue to be talking about buildings in this kind of format, but we have launched a new podcast show here at Atlas called Atlas Live, where we'll cover buildings, transportation, water, climate funding, all the kinds of things that we cover here at Atlas. I will be on there as well as other hosts. Our founder, Nick Nigro, just hosted the first episode with two experts on kind of the outlook for 2026 for the clean economy. So, please check that out and stay tuned. We will see you on Atlas Live soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.